This week we're going to take up the topic of curriculum development. Now, another way of thinking of that is by asking the question, how is curriculum made? First, I think we can look at curriculum development as two metaphors. The first is the curriculum as a machine, and the second is the curriculum as an organism. If we think of the curriculum as a machine, I think we realize that it is externally monitored, it's designed by experts, it's controlled, finely precisioned, and the outcomes are very, very predictable. However, if we think of the curriculum as an organism, we realize that it's a living system. The communications are internal. The system is adapting to its environment constantly, and it is the components within the system that actually do the monitoring and initiating change. Now, if we put these two metaphors on a continuum, the machine on one side and the organism on the other side, we can kind of see how the different theorists for curriculum development fall along this continuum. Ralph Tyler and Hilda Taba think of the curriculum more as a machine. Nathan Glatthorn and the more postmodern theorists or emergent curriculum theorists tend to view the curriculum as an organism. We'll look at each of these theorists in closer detail in this presentation. First model we'd like to look at is Ralph Tyler's. He calls it a management-driven model. And the first characteristic is that it is rational and technical. Rational in that it follows a very logical sequence of events, and technical in that it is presumed that there are decisions that have to be made in this process by experts. And he conceives curriculum development really as having four principles, or actually we could say four questions that we ask as we go about the process of developing the curriculum. And notice that they occur in sequence. First, we define the purpose of the school. That's what we talked about last week with the aims and goals of education. Then we look at the educational experiences and make sure that they're related to those aims and goals. Then we organize those experiences in some form of an order that makes sense in terms of the content of the curriculum and the experiences that we want the children to have. And then we evaluate the outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very linear in its design. Let's take a little closer look at Ralph Tyler's model. And again, notice the sequential order of the events that occur in his model. He says that we begin by first looking at the sources. And by that he means that we consider the needs of the students and the needs of the society that serves the students. And we also look at the subject matter that we think is important. We make decisions about what it is that we want our students to actually be able to do and know. And it is those sources of information that really are going to form the basis of our goals of education and general objectives. But we don't really develop performance objectives yet. We have to take into consideration what we know about the science of learning and the social systems in which learning is going to occur. In other words, we take what we know about educational psychology and educational sociology, and they are the filters through which these goals and general objectives are screened, and then we end up with our performance objectives, the objectives that we're actually going to use to plan the educational experiences of the children. And then, of course, after we plan the experiences, then we design our evaluation system. Now, Hilda Taba follows Ralph Tyler's model for curriculum development very closely. Actually, when we look at the steps that she recommends following for developing curriculum, you'll see that it looks almost exactly like Ralph Tyler's. What you don't see in these steps, however, is a philosophy of Hilda Taba, and that is that teachers really need to be the primary agent for making these decisions. And that's a little bit different than Ralph Tyler's model. Ralph Tyler, when he developed his model, this was around the middle of the 20th century, Ralph Tyler presumed that administrators and officials at the state level would be making these decisions. Hilda Taba said that the same order of decisions would be followed, but the decisions themselves needed to rest with the teaching community. Now there is a third curriculum model I'd like you to be familiar with, and notice we're moving a little further away from the curriculum as a machine and a little bit closer toward the curriculum as an organism. That's Nathan Glatthorn's naturalistic model. He calls it a naturalistic model because he says that curriculum really ought to be more natural in its development. We need to think of the curriculum as a political process, one that has to engage all of the constituencies that are going to have some say in implementing the curriculum, and that we begin actually by looking at and considering all the options that are available to us. Then we define the context for the curriculum. Now, by context for the curriculum, he would say that, well, we consider what kind of community this curriculum is going to be implemented in, and who is actually going to be served by the curriculum, who all of the stakeholders are. That's what he means by context. Then he said the third step is to actually build some political alliances with the stakeholders. This is one of the big departures between his model and Hilda Taba's and Ralph Tyler's. He realizes that curriculum ultimately is a political process. Then after we built these alliances with the stakeholders, then we have to consider the subject matter that we're trying to structure into the curriculum, get a better idea of the students that we're going to be serving, and get updated with all of the instructional methodologies that we're going to be using. From that point forward, then, you'll notice that the steps in the model are very similar to Ralph Tyler's and Hilda Taba's. We organize the content, we plan the experiences, we plan the evaluation, and then we develop the learning scenarios, which is his jargon, actually, for describing the methods and techniques that we would actually be using to implement the curriculum. Now, the fourth model I'd like you to be familiar with is the Emergent curriculum model, and this is an approach that is much more laissez-faire. We sort of let the curriculum just evolve rather than decide it as a matter of policy. And we realize that as it evolves, there will be a number of influences that will push it in one direction or another. And sometimes these influences are contradictory, or they're pushing against one another instead of working with one another. And just look at some examples of what these influences might be. The textbook companies, companies that develop and sell the tests to states and school districts, business and industry, the various professional organizations, the teachers themselves and the administrative organizations. All of these institutions or enterprises in some way have a strong stake in what the curriculum is going to be, and it is the natural process of these forces working with one another and against one another that actually creates the curriculum. In other words, it is strictly an internal system that is constantly changing. Now, if we put all these models together, you can kind of see we're back where we started at the first week. Why, what, and how. Why is the aims, goals, and objectives? What is the content, scope, sequence, articulation? How, method, activities, evaluation. Whether we use Tyler's model or Hilda Taba's model, Glatthorn's model, even the Emergent model, we're still asking these basic questions. The only thing that differs with these models is how formal we make this process, or how informal we allow it to become. What I like to do is, when I work with schools on curriculum projects, is to try to synthesize all of these models into one process so that we all kind of have a handle on how we begin and where we go and where we plan to end up when we start a curriculum development project. And these are the steps that I like to describe, and I think when you look through this, you'll see a little bit of Ralph Tyler and Hilda Taba, but also quite a bit of Nathan Gladhorn, and also we allow for the fact that there are going to be stakeholders influencing the curriculum in ways that we may not even recognize. But we begin with really understanding who the curriculum is for. Then we define the context, who the curriculum is serving, and who it's implementing. Then we determine our aims, our goals, our objectives. We select the content. But after the content has been selected, and all of this is a process involving all of the stakeholders, after the content's been selected, then the teachers take over. The teachers organize the content. They determine the scope and the sequence. The teachers decide the methods and the activities for actually implementing that curriculum. And then we have to go back to the stakeholders who will determine the evaluation system, whether we're using standardized tests or whether we'll be using more authentic assessments. And then finally we evaluate the results and then use those results to redefine or redescribe the context that we're actually going to be serving. You'll notice this last step makes this process circular. That is, it's never ending. As soon as we've implemented the curriculum, we're also evaluating the curriculum and using that information from the evaluation to make some adjustments. I'd like to end the presentation by asking just a couple of questions. Go back and look at all of the models, Ralph Tyler's, Hilda Taba's, Nathan Gladhorn's, the Emergent model, even the synthesis that I tried to make out of all of the models together. And I want to ask just which model you think best describes the way curriculum is actually made in public schools today. Which one best represents the way decisions about why we teach, what we teach, and how we teach best represents the situation today. And then the second question is which one you think is preferable for public schools today. That is, would result in the best curriculum, would also result in support for the curriculum. Support from all of the different stakeholders that are involved in the curriculum development process. As we continue with some of our discussions, in one way or another we'll be circling back to these two questions. Now you're ready to go ahead and begin the reading response for this week, and we'll of course be continuing with one of our debates.